Hey, Nikita, what are we talking about on this episode of the DevOps Lab?
We are talking about integrating Azure Load Testing into Azure DevOps.
So join us for this episode as we show you how to integrate these tools together. Welcome to this episode of the DevOps Lab, where we're back again talking about Azure Load Testing, this time with Azure DevOps. Nikita, welcome back.
Hi, April. Thanks for having me again.
Great to have you back. You are our Azure Load Testing expert at Microsoft, definitely. So tell everyone out there what else it is you do for Microsoft.
Yeah, so I'm a product manager with the Azure Load Testing team, and I've been working for Azure Load Testing for a while now. And now Azure Load Testing is is generally available for everyone to use. So pretty excited about that, and we'll talk about how Azure Load Testing can be used in Azure DevOps and integrated in your CI/CD pipelines.
Awesome. And we've already done a couple episodes for everyone out there watching. We've talked about Azure Load Testing in depth. You showed us how to get started quickly. Then you went more in depth and showed us how to configure it. In the last episode, we deployed GitHub Actions. Now we're going to do it with Azure DevOps because it is super critical. We get this deployed in our pipelines and make it part of our development process. So go ahead and take it away.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me start by showing you what we are going to load test today. So this is the .NET Podcast web app that is basically a web application which has a bunch of podcasts. You can look for what podcast it has, and then you can listen to podcasts. So it has a lot of content over here. So since we expect a lot of users to use this, we want to load test and see if this is performing fine. But with a twist, we want to test a, web app with a access restriction. So as you can see, this is another version of the same web application, and this is not accessible from a public internet. This is a private web app. So this we can do this as well using Azure Load Testing, and I'll show you how to do it today using Azure DevOps as well. So
And it makes sense not to expose our demo environments to public domain, right?
yeah, that absolutely makes sense.
Cool.
Let's start by looking at the repo where we have our source code for the .NET podcast. As you can see, this is our repo that we have. There's the source code of the application, but there's also a test folder that I have configured here. And the test folder contains all of the files that I require for me to run my load test from Azure DevOps. As you can see, there's an ARM template folder here, which contains the ARM template for you to manage the infrastructure, which is the Azure Load Testing resource. It allows you to create and manage the resource from the pipeline. Once you have deployed your resource and you have a resource up and running, you can just run load tests in it. So I've configured all the files that are required here. As you can see, we require a JMeter script for you to run the load test. And I prepared a JMeter script. Let me just take you quickly through the JMeter script. This is the JMeter script for the podcast application. As you can see, I've configured 4 different pages that I want to load test: the podcast page, the home page, the discover page, and the search page. And there's also a CSV input data file that we are providing for our input data as parameters. So I have the CSV data set config element here. And I also have a user-defined variable which uses a custom function. So this custom function grabs the environment variable. So custom functions, custom plugins are a way where you can extend the core functionality of Apache JMeter. You can write custom code, and you can basically use much more than what JMeter provides out of the box. So Azure Load Testing allows you to also run custom plugins on your JMeter script. So I have this script configured, and I have it version controlled here in my repo. So as you know, the benefit of version controlling is that you can keep track of changes over time. So I can always look at what happened to my JMeter script, how what changes were made, and I can always keep track of those changes.
Absolutely. And that's so critical when we talk about automating our deployments and testing our environments. You can see on your screen, we have the commits. We can go to the commits. And if somebody changes it, we can see how the that changes transpired, we can revert those changes. Maybe one of our scripts, one of our JMeter scripts isn't correct. We can revert that. We have different versions of it. So this is fantastic. I love having the ability to version control my testing suite, because if we make changes, we need to know why it changed, when it changed, because that could affect the output of our tests as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So as you can see, I have my JMeter script. I have the jar file, which is basically the custom function that we have configured in our JMeter script.
Mm-hmm.
We also have a CSV file to provide input data to our load test. So I have all of these version controlled, but I also have a config YAML. So this is basically config.yaml is how you configure all the settings of your load test. So this is configuration as code. So as you can see, we have defined different parameters that are required for you to run your load test. Like you provide what is your test plan, which is basically pointing to the JMeter script. You have configured what engine instances, how many engine instances you want to run your load on. You can provide all the configuration files, like the jar file, the CSV file here. You have many options, like, for example, you can say split the CSV file evenly across all the load engines that you have configured, which allows you to basically provide a unique row for every engine. This is very important in scenarios where you are using login functionality and you don't want the same user to be logged in different engines, right? So
That
you
makes
can
sense.
provide just split all the rows equally. Um, then we also have environment variables. Now, this is the environment variable that would be picked up by the custom function that I've written. And I've provided the URL for the web app as the environment variable here. Uh, Now, my web app also requires a certificate for authentication. So, client certificate authentication is one way for you to secure your endpoints. So, we have secured it using a certificate. And as you can see, I've just provided the name and I've stored the certificate in a key vault, and I've provided the URL for the certificate here. So once you do that, you can also see that I provided the subnet ID. Now, remember when we said that the web app is not publicly accessible and it's only accessible
Mm-hmm.
from a virtual network?
Yep.
Yeah, so this is how you can just provide the details of the subnet ID. You can just provide the resource ID of the subnet, and you're good to go. You can just load test a private application. So it's as simple as providing a subnet ID. Um, Coming to failure criteria, now this is very important for a load testing scenario in a CI/CD pipeline. Basically, this allows you to set certain thresholds uh, based on your expectations of how your web application should perform. So it's important in a CI/CD pipeline because this triggers the automation of either failing or passing your pipeline based on the criteria that you set. So as you can see, I've set some criteria here for the podcast page. I'm saying that my 90th percentile of response time should not be greater than 5,000 milliseconds. And I've set similarly for a home page at an aggregate level, I'm saying that the percentage error shouldn't be greater than 10. So this is one way of me telling that these are my expectations from my web application. And if this does not uh, qualify, then just fail the pipeline, and I'll be alerted of what action I can take if this pipeline has failed.
Absolutely. And I love the failure criteria. It gives us a very defined way to say, oh, our app is working anyways. It's not, because it won't scale to what we need it to. And actually under load, it won't work. So this is fantastic. Now, Nikita, I have a love-hate with YAML files. Can you tell me, like, how do we generate these YAML files for our configs? Because, like, I struggle with YAML. So what's the easiest and best way to get started with these?
Yeah, while we have samples of these YAMLs available in our repos, but you also can download this if you have run a load test from Portal, which is very easy for you to configure and get started with. You can always run a load test from there, and if everything is working fine, you can download the input artifacts, and I'll show you how to do that. You can just download the artifacts and you get an auto-generated YAML file. You just have to commit these to your repo, and you are good to go, and you can just start running your load test.
Awesome, because I struggle with YAML configuration. So being able to just configure it what I need, see it, see all the options, output that YAML, that's such an easy way to get started, get into my source control, and then we have ability to make sure that it doesn't get changed, or if someone changes it, we can revert it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah. So once you have all your files that you need for your load test in your repo, you can just go and configure your pipeline, right? So this is a pipeline basically which runs a load test. So you can, as you can see, this load test first deploys the ARM template that we had. So to create the Azure load testing resource. And once you have created a load testing resource, you have an Azure load testing task. So in this task, you just provide what is your Azure service connection, what is your test config file that we saw, basically your load test YAML file that we saw earlier, and what is your resource group and your load test resource in which you want to run, right? So you can just provide these inputs here, and you're good to go. Now we also export the results once the load test completes into a folder in your pipeline workspace. And this is a folder where we export the results. As you can see, you can just publish these as artifacts into your pipelines, and they'll be available for you to consume. So you can download those and share those across as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so now that we have our pipeline, all our files, we can just run this, and it is just triggered the load test. As you can see, my pipeline has started. Yeah, so while this runs, I can just take you through a previous run, since this might take some time to run. So I'll just take you, as you can see, this is the one which is running, but I also ran a one few hours ago. And as you can see, this was the pipeline that failed. And as you see, the task that failed is Azure load testing task. So this is the output that you get from Azure load testing task. Things are going fine when you created a test run, and then you got a portal URL where you can just go and click and see what is the progress. We'll just look at that in a moment. And we also have the summary. Once the test run is completed, you have what was the start time, end time, how many virtual users, and what was the status of the test. So the test status is done, which says that the test run completed. But let's look at the test criteria. As you see, we had defined three criteria, and two of them failed, and that's the reason why the load testing task failed. Now, when we pass or fail based on the test criteria, this allows you to make sure that a build which is not supposed to go into production gets stopped by failing the pipeline, right? So it makes sure that if a build is not passing your expectations, then it's stopped at this stage, and you're not introducing a non-performant code into your production.
Absolutely. This is great because it fails the pipeline. We can stop, we can address the issues. We can see the issues there in the output from the pipeline run. And then you have a link to go to the Azure portal and see that. Can you take us to the Azure portal and show us what that output looks like? Because we can get a lot more detail into what actually happened and why that happened.
Definitely. As you can see, this was the test run that I clicked from the pipeline logs, and this is how it shows. It shows that it failed. You have all the test statistics here and the test criteria, right? You also get a very good visualization of what happened over time. You have how did the response time look over time, how much was the throughput for the application that it could handle. And then, as you can see, there are a bunch of errors here. And these are 500 errors. Basically, the application was not able to take the load, right? You also have the option of configuring server-side components. Now you can just say what are the application components of your target application, and you can basically monitor those. So I'm selecting all my
all your
app
infrastructure, and we can see
components.
exactly where the bottleneck is. So all those dependencies in our infrastructure, we can select, we can pull them through, and it will pull the reporting out so we can define where this is failing. That's awesome.
Yeah. So as you can see, you get all the metrics from Azure Monitor for the app components that I've configured, and I can see what happened over time. These you can also configure custom metrics. Here I've selected just the default ones, but you can also configure if you're looking for something specific. As you can see, uh, the app service CPU was high, but it is still fine. But as you can see here, the SQL Server really the CPU percentage was very high, and that could be one of the reasons why uh, the app was not responding, right? So
Mhm.
there were a lot of 500 errors. So this way you can just drill deeper and see what are the issues. Is it a code issue, or is it a issue with your infrastructure? Do you need to upgrade the SKU, or what measures you can take to improve the performance?
Awesome. Nikita, thank you so much. I have loved seeing Azure Load Testing go into general availability. The integration into both Azure DevOps and GitHub Actions has been awesome. So thank you so much for showing us how to put that into our pipelines in Azure DevOps. And for everyone out there, we'll have all the resources available for you in the description so you can follow along and get started with Azure Load Testing. So we'll see you next time on the DevOps Lab.